I heard this quote yesterday. I was watching a podcast. I forget the name of the guy that was on it, but he's pretty successful. His company does about 100 million a year. And he says social media is dead. It's social commerce now. That's really what it is. Like you
Social
are either
commerce?
social commerce. Yeah, like you're either a consumer or a producer on social channels, right?
Yeah.
And for anybody who's a producer, it's not social media, it's social commerce. It's trying to find your customers, really.
Yeah. What's the goal of doing social media? The likelihood that you're trying to become famous is, I think, well, it's like why? Why are
Yeah.
you trying
Yeah.
to become
Right. Yeah.
famous?
Exactly. Yeah. Would you rather? It's like the age old. Do you want a million followers or $1 million?
Yeah. What would you answer to that now? Like today?
I'll take another $1 million.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
don't
say
need a
I'll
million
take the million.
followers.
I'll take the
Yeah,
million
of
bucks.
course.
Yeah.
I mean, you could take the million followers if you have a high conversion rate and you have a high ticket offer, or like if you have some sort of business model that you're going to push it towards. But even still, the direct line is the money. Like I would way take the money over the followers.
Yeah. And because followers are not guaranteed of success anymore, which I think is one of the other things that was changed within the algorithms within the last maybe 2 to 3 years, where
Yeah.
the content that can go incredibly viral does not need to be from an established account. It can be from a brand new account.
Yeah, yeah, it's really true. And I'm noticing now that I'm finding content creators to put on contracts for our new mobile app.
Hmm.
The views that you have in your engagement rate is far more important than your followers. The followers are almost irrelevant, actually. It's the level of
Exactly.
engagement that you get in relation to the number of views that you have.
This is why my like cost per video dropped so significantly because the average views I was getting on my videos went from like 50,000 down to 5,000,
Hmm.
which is whatever. But in terms of brand deals, the $3,500 quotes that I was getting last year are no longer viable, which makes sense because it's not getting as many views.
Yeah, I think brands are also becoming more attuned to what CPMs they should be paying
Hmm.
versus what the RPM is. And it depends on the industry, but in most revenue
Oh,
per thousand views. So like in most consumer spaces, if you look at fitness or parenting or dieting or like any sort of niche area, a higher CPM that you would pay as a brand is probably $5. So, and I think that even speaking to different influencer networks, like influencer agencies that represent different influencers and set their prices, I've noticed that the prices are lower now than what they were a couple of years ago
hmm.
because the mystery is starting to get debunked a little bit. We now understand if someone has, let's say, a 7% engagement rate on their content and 100,000 views, it'll probably translate to about a 2.5 to 3% click through rate. And then from there, what's your click through rate to download? What's your download to subscription? What's your
Hmm.
subscription to renewal? So we can start to draw this line of to dollar, which,
Yeah.
okay, it's going to bring me to a whole other part of this conversation, which is attribution, how people are actually tracking the revenue for it. But yeah, I think brands are becoming more aware on how to pay for these deals. And I think that they're not shelling out buku bucks like they used to. Like they're not just spilling money out for nothing.
That's really interesting because that's what I had in my media guide and rate sheet for the last 2 years was 2.5% of viewers on my content will go to your website.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And that was all based off of the data that we could see off of my own sites and my own analytics and tracking at the time. But the fact that you're saying that basically the same stat 2 years later,
Yes, it's kind of
that's
the same
interesting.
thing. And it depends. So I am building an internal equation to calculate what your average views versus your engagement percentages on Instagram and TikTok, how that relates to what your click through rate is going to be. And it will get more and more accurate over time as we work with more content creators. But right now, if I'm just looking at my spreadsheet here, if you have, let's say, an average engagement rate of like 5%, your click through rate is probably going to be around 2.5%. So then you just start to draw the line, right? At 100,000 views at a 5% engagement rate and a 2.5% click through rate. How many people are going to convert from your free trial or you download to a subscription. And like, it's just a lot easier to do that math. And then I'm also getting really interested in influencer attribution because attribution is so difficult to do, right? Like,
multi-billion-dollar problem solved right there if we can figure that one out.
yeah, exactly. And there's a ton of money spent on trying to solve it. And there's a bunch of different companies that are approaching the solution in different ways. And I think they're all doing it from a data perspective. Like, they're starting with the data, which is how do we attribute like your 7-day click, 1-day view, or 30-day click, 2-day view, something like everybody has a different way to calculate the equation. And then how do you share revenue if they came from TikTok and Google? What I'm finding now is when you're paying content creators specifically on TikTok, the attribution is the revenue you generated 24 hours after following the content being posted. That's your attribution and how much that deviates above your baseline of renewals. So I've seen 2 creator platforms that are doing or that are doing organic content attribution this way.
Interesting. Only for TikTok?
Only for TikTok.
Okay. Interesting.
Because the lifespan of TikTok and Instagram, it's similar, but it's not the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With the exception of truly viral content. That's always the exception.
It's not perfect, but that's the thing. No attribution is perfect. Trust me, dude, I have looked at every fucking platform you can for attribution.
Well, and that's just the algorithm too. Like you can't attribute above the algorithm.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you just attribute above or below your revenue baseline for that day, like what you're averaging, that versus the views that video gets and the increase in revenue relative to those views. And you can do things like geo-target it. Like there's a bunch of other little stuff that you can do, but it's just a clear line. It's like you posted it. What was the revenue influx 24 hours after that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes it a lot easier, not so much if you're a service business, but if you have software or SaaS or anything that doesn't require like a fulfillment team, it's a lot easier to give performance-based incentives.
Yeah. Yeah. If there's no like sales team, you're like a front line, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I've seen is brands giving dollar bonuses for every 1,000 views over a certain amount. So if your average is 20,000, they would give like a $5 CPM bonus for every 1,000 views over 20,000. Or, you know what I mean? It's like for every 1,000 views above your average view on a video, you'll give a bonus. Or just straight up, I'll give you 50% of the revenue generated the 24 hours following you posting the video.
Interesting.
There's a couple different ways to cut it, but I think brands are getting a little more creative on how to pay influencers because the rates that they demand are not often realistic.
And well, yeah, for sure. And it's because the influencers are trying to find the brands that will overpay without saying anything.
Exactly.
The amount of times that's happened to me when I'm like, oh, I'll just throw out this wild, crazy number. And they're like, yeah, sure. Okay. I'll take that VC money that you guys are throwing down the drain.
Yeah. But this is where I think the tables are turning a little bit because a couple years ago when TikTok was popping off and it was not easy, but you could have videos that go viral, like random videos that would just push a ton of traffic to your site. Right? That was the advantage for the small business, right? For like the person just starting out, they're doing between 100K to call it 5 million on their own Shopify brand. That was the advantage. You could have your own videos that go viral. But now it's flipping a little bit back towards these larger corporations because they can afford to pay influencers larger sums because they have so much revenue coming into other places. So that's why you get larger software companies willing to pay you much larger sums, and the little guys can't necessarily keep up with what they're willing to pay other content creators. Does that make sense?
Yeah.